A mountain man saw little twins searching through his trash on Christmas Eve, and what he did next will change everything. In the dead of winter, with snow choking the valley and wolves howling in the dark, two starving children claw through scraps outside a lonely cabin. The man inside, scarred by loss, hardened by years of silence, opens the door, ready to drive them off. But what he finds in their hollow eyes stops him cold. He takes them in, only to face the wrath of the town. A sheriff pounding on the door with the law in his fist. Neighbors whispering about bloodlines they don't want. And a secret about where these children came from, one that could tear the town apart. On a night meant for peace and hymns, one man must choose between obeying the law or protecting the innocent. Will he give the children up to the orphanage or risk everything to call them his own? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The bitter wind howled through the pines, rattling the wooden shutters of Ronald Boone's cabin. He sat alone at his rough-hewn table, scraping the last bits of beans from his tin plate with a chunk of cornbread. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the log walls, but its warmth couldn't chase away the emptiness that had been his only companion. These past 3 years, ain't nothing out there but cold and quiet, he muttered, running calloused fingers through his graying beard. The cabin felt especially hollow tonight, being Christmas Eve and all. He'd stopped marking such occasions after Sarah passed, but something about this night made the silence press harder against his ears. A metallic clatter outside broke through his brooding. Ronald's head snapped up, his weathered face tightening. In one fluid motion born of years in the wilderness, he grabbed his rifle from its peg and snatched up the brass lantern from the table. "Better not be that mangy bear again," he growled, though he knew bears would be deep in their winter sleep by now. The door creaked as he pushed it open, letting in a blast of snow that stung his face. The lantern's glow cut through the swirling white, illuminating his trash barrel at the corner of the porch. What he saw there stopped him cold. Two tiny figures in threadbare dresses huddled over the barrel, their small hands purple with cold as they dug through the scraps. Their dark hair whipped in the wind, and their thin shoulders trembled beneath clothes that were nowhere near warm enough for a night like this. "Hey!" he barked, more from surprise than anger. "What in tarnation?" Both girls jerked upright like startled deer. They were identical as two peas, with high Cherokee cheekbones and eyes dark as midnight. But it was their hollow cheeks and the desperate hunger in their expressions that made Ronald's throat tighten. He could count their ribs through their worn cotton dresses. One girl clutched a moldy piece of cornbread to her chest, while the other stepped slightly in front of her sister, chin raised despite her trembling. Neither spoke, but their eyes never left his face, watching him with a mixture of fear and defiance that twisted something deep in Ronald's chest. He opened his mouth to send them on their way. He had no business with other folks' troubles, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he found himself lowering the rifle, propping it against the doorframe. The wind keened around the cabin's corners, driving another sheet of snow across the porch. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, his breath frosting in the air. The girls couldn't be more than 7 years old, out here alone on Christmas Eve, desperate enough to dig through a stranger's trash. His gaze drifted to the empty chair by his fire, the one Sarah used to sit in while she mended and hummed hymns. The bolder of the twins, the one standing protective. Guard swallowed hard and spoke. "We're sorry, mister. We was just so hungry." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a dignity beyond her years. Her sister nodded, fingers still clutched around that piece of old cornbread like it was pure gold. "Ain't eaten since yesterday morning," she added softly. Ronald felt something crack in his chest, like spring ice breaking up on the creek. 3 years he'd spent wrapped in his grief like a thick blanket, keeping the world and its hurts at arm's length. But standing there in the snow, watching these two half-frozen little girls trying to make a meal from his garbage. He felt that blanket begin to slip. Sarah would have already had them by the fire with bowls of soup in their hands. The thought came unbidden, along with a memory of her voice. The good Lord sends us the chances to do right, Ronald. We just have to be brave enough to take them. He cleared his throat roughly. Well, can't have you out here freezing to death on Christmas Eve. His voice came out gruffer than he meant it to, but the girl's eyes widened with hope. Got some fresh cornbread inside, and beans still warm on the stove. Reckon you'd rather have that than what's in that barrel. The sisters exchanged a quick glance, a whole conversation passing between them than that single look. The quiet one still clutched her moldy prize, as if afraid this offer might vanish like smoke. Come on now, Ronald said, gentling his tone. Fire's warm, and there's plenty to share. He held the door wider, letting the lamplight spill out invitingly. I'm Ronald Boone. What do they call you to? I'm Lydia, said the bolder twin, then gestured to her sister. This here's May. We're much obliged, Mr. Boone. Despite their obvious hunger, both girls remembered to duck their heads politely before stepping past him into the cabin. The fire crackled. As Ronald ushered the twins inside, their small boots leaving wet marks on the wooden floor. He set his rifle carefully against the wall, noting how both girls tracked his every movement with wary eyes. The firelight cast long shadows across their faces, making them seem even more haunted and hollow-cheeked than they'd appeared outside. Come on closer to the fire, Ronald said, trying to soften his voice. The girls huddled near the door, shoulders touching, like two frightened fawns ready to bolt. Ain't nobody gonna hurt you here. He moved slowly to the stove, aware of their watchful gazes. The bean pot still simmered, and he had fresh cornbread cooling on the shelf. His hand shook slightly as he filled a tin plate. He wasn't used to serving others anymore. The quiet had been his only companion for so long. Here now, he said, setting the plate on the table. Eat up while it's warm. He added 2 spoons, remembering at the last moment the proper ways Sarah had taught him about hosting. The girls approached the table cautiously, but their restraint crumbled at the sight of the steaming food. They fell upon the beans like they hadn't eaten in days, which Ronald realized with a pang might well be true. They took turns with the spoons, each making sure her sister got her share. Might tell me your names, he ventured, settling into his chair by the fire. He didn't want to crowd them while they ate. The bolder twin, the one who'd spoken outside, paused between bites. I'm Lydia, she whispered. That's May. Her sister nodded without looking up from the plate. Your folks, Ronald hesitated, not wanting to spook them. They know where you are? Lydia's face clouded. Mama said. She said someone would come, her voice quavered. She left us at the station in town, told us to wait. But nobody came. May finally spoke, her voice so soft Ronald had to lean forward to hear. She promised. Said we just had to wait quiet like, and someone would fetch us. Ronald studied their clothes in the firelight. Their cotton dresses, though once fine, were worn thin and patched in places. Their shoes were caked with snow and mud, the leather cracking. How long had they been wandering? The thought of these little ones alone in the bitter cold made his chest ache. The girls finished every scrap of food on the plate, using the cornbread to wipe it clean. They were warming up now, their cheeks gaining some color, but they still shivered in their thin dresses. Ronald found himself rising, moving toward the old trunk in the corner. He hadn't opened it since Sarah. The lid creaked as he lifted it, and the familiar scent of cedar and lavender rose up Sarah's favorite soap. On top lay her best wool shawl, carefully folded, blue as summer cornflowers. His hands trembled as he lifted it out. Here, he said gruffly, holding out the shawl. Share this between you. It's plenty big enough for 2. The girls accepted it reverently, wrapping themselves together in the soft wool. The sight of them huddled in Sarah's shawl hit Ronald like a physical blow. She would have been a mother herself by now if things had been different. If the fever hadn't taken her and their unborn child 3 winters ago, leaving him to dig 2 graves in the frozen ground. He turned away, blinking hard. The silence in the cabin pressed in, broken only by the pop and hiss of the fire. What was he supposed to do with them? The right thing would be to take them to town tomorrow, turn them over to the proper authorities. But something in their faces, in their quiet dignity, despite their desperate circumstances, made him hesitate. "Reckon you'll need a place to sleep," he said finally. He pulled a thick quilt from the trunk, another of Sarah's making, and spread it on the floor near the hearth. The girls watched him, hope and uncertainty warring in their expressions. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Boone," Lydia said formally, though her eyes were already heavy with exhaustion. May simply nodded, swaying slightly where she stood. "Get some rest now?" Ronald told him, settling back in his chair. "We'll figure things out come morning." The twins curled up together on the quilt, still wrapped in Sarah's shawl. Their breathing soon settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, but Ronald sat awake, watching the fire. The cabin felt different with them, there less empty somehow, despite the memories their presence stirred up. He hadn't realized how deep the silence had grown until it was broken by their soft breathing. He told himself he was just keeping them safe for the night. Come morning, he'd have to decide what to do with them. But for now, on this cold Christmas Eve, he let himself feel the strange comfort of not being alone. Morning crept through the frost-rimmed window, painting delicate patterns on the cabin floor. Ronald stood at his cast-iron stove, stirring a pot of porridge with slow, deliberate movements. The familiar task felt different this morning. Knowing there were 2 small mouths to feed Dot behind him, whispers rustled like leaves near the hearth. The twins were awakening, their quiet conversation barely louder than the crackling fire. Ronald glanced over his shoulder, watching them sit up together, still wrapped in Sarah's blue shawl. "Best get up now," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Breakfast is nearly ready." The girls untangled themselves from the quilt, smoothing their wrinkled dresses with careful hands. In the clear morning light, Ronald could see their features better matching heart-shaped faces, dark eyes that held both wisdom and wariness. Their black hair hung in tangled braids past their shoulders. "I'm Lydia," the bolder twin announced again, straightening her spine. "This here's May." She gestured to her sister, who ducked her head shyly but offered a small smile. Ronald nodded, spooning porridge into 3 bowls. "Proper pleased to meet you both." He set the bowls on the table, adding a precious spoonful of molasses to each. "Might tell me how you came to be out in such weather." The girls settled at the table, but their eyes stayed fixed on their bowls. Finally, Lydia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama was a preacher's widow. We traveled some after Papa died. But then," she swallowed hard. May picked up the thread, her quiet voice steadier than her sister's. "Food got scarce. Mama left us at the station in Millbrook. Said someone would come fetch us, but..." She trailed off, stirring her porridge without eating. Ronald's hands tightened on his spoon, fury building in his chest at the thought of anyone abandoning children to such a fate. But he'd seen desperation do strange things to folks out here. Sometimes the weight of responsibility could break even the strongest spirit. "Well," he said gruffly, pushing down his anger, "best eat up. Got chores need doing, and you 2 can help." The girls' faces brightened at this, as if grateful for the chance to be useful. They finished their porridge quickly, scraping the bowls clean. Outside, the morning air bit sharp and clean. Ronald led the twins to his woodpile, showing them how to stack the smaller logs in their arms. "Like this," he demonstrated, laying the pieces in a neat row. "Keeps them dry and ready for burning." Lydia and May took to the task with determination. Though their small arms could only carry 2 or 3 pieces at a time, Soon, their serious faces gave way to slight smiles as they raced each other back and forth. A thin laugh escaped May when Lydia nearly tripped over a hidden root, and the sound seemed to startle them both. The clearing, usually silent except for wind in the pines, filled with their soft voices and footsteps. Ronald found himself pausing in his own work, watching them dart back and forth like industrious sparrows. After the wood was stacked, Ronald saddled his old mule, Jenny. "Need to haul water from the creek," he explained, securing empty buckets to the saddle. The twins followed him down the trail, their eyes wide at every new sight. "Look." Lydia pointed to a snowshoe rabbit darting through the underbrush. "May, did you see?" "There's berries here," May discovered, touching a frozen rosehip with careful fingers. "Come spring, will they be good to eat?" Their questions tumbled one after another, exhausting but somehow warming. Ronald found himself explaining about pine sap and deer tracks, showing them which trees made the best firewood, pointing out a hawk circling overhead. Their wonder at these everyday sights made him see his familiar world a new dot at the creek. Ice rimmed the banks, but the middle still ran clear and deep. Ronald filled his buckets while the girls watched the water swirl, making up stories about fish hiding beneath the surface. Evening settled early, as it did in winter. Back in the cabin, Ronald prepared venison stew, adding dried carrots and the last of his potatoes. Before the girls could sit down, he cleared his throat. "Best wash those hands first," he said, surprised to hear Sarah's words in his own voice. She'd always insisted on clean hands at table. The twins scrubbed obediently at the wash basin, then settled near the fire with their bowls. Ronald took his usual chair, but something felt different. The cabin's familiar walls held the same items, his rifle above the door, Sarah's quilts folded neat, the iron cookware hanging in its place. But the space no longer echoed with emptiness. Instead, it felt warmer somehow, filled with small sounds of live spoons clinking against bowls, quiet breathing, the rustle of fabric as the girls shifted closer to fire. Snow fell heavier as evening settled over the cabin, thick flakes dancing past the windows. Inside, the fire cast warm shadows across the plank floor while Ronald showed Lydia and May how to mend a frayed wool blanket. "Thread needs to be strong," he explained, demonstrating how to knot it properly. "Like this, see? Pull it tight, but not so tight it puckers." May's small fingers worked carefully with the needle, her face scrunched in concentration. Lydia watched, holding the blanket's edge steady for her sister. "Mama taught us some," Lydia said softly. But her hand shook too much near the end. Ronald opened his mouth to respond, but heavy boots crunching through snow stopped him short. His spine stiffened at the sound of footsteps on his porch. A loud knock rattled the cabin door, making both girls jump. "Stay put," Ronald told them quietly, rising from his chair. His hand brushed his rifle as he crossed to the door, but he left it hanging on its pegs. Opening the door revealed Sheriff Rudd's broad frame, a brass lantern casting harsh light across his weathered face. Behind him stood Deputy Wilson, hand resting too casual-like on his gun belt. The bitter wind whipped snow between them, but Rudd's cold stare made the night seem warmer by comparison. "Evening, Boone," Rudd said, his voice clipped. "Word in town is you're harboring some unexpected guests." Ronald's fingers tightened on the doorframe. "News travels fast for such weather. Miller's boy saw smoke from your chimney while checking trap lines." Said he heard children's voices. Rudd's gaze slid past Ronald to where the twins huddled near the fire. His lip curled slightly. "Half-breed orphans, by the look of them. They were freezing to death," Ronald said evenly. "Found them Christmas Eve, searching for food. Vagrant children are a county matter," Rudd snapped. "Especially ones with Cherokee blood. Their kind brings trouble." Ronald's jaw clenched. "They're just little girls. Little girls need proper raising," Rudd countered. "Not some mountain hermit's charity. Pine Bluff won't tolerate unregistered orphans running loose." particularly with their background. He straightened his coat, frost gleaming on his badge. "I'll be back with a court order by New Year's. County orphanage has space." Behind Ronald, a small whimper but silence. He glanced back to see both girls pressed against his legs, their dark eyes wide with fear. May's fingers clutched his trousers while Lydia tried to look brave, chin raised despite her trembling. "They ain't causing trouble here," Ronald said, voice low and steady. "That's not your decision to make." Rudd's hand settled meaningfully on his own gun belt. "Law's clear about orphans. Boone, don't make this difficult." The deputy shifted uncomfortably in the deepening snow. But Rudd stood unmoved, challenge written in every line of his face. Ronald met his stare. "Much obliged for your concern, Sheriff. But it's getting late, and these children need their rest." Rudd's eyes narrowed at the dismissal. 3 days, Boone. Have them ready." He turned sharply, boots crunching as he stalked away. The deputy hurried to follow, their lantern light fading into the swirling snow. Ronald closed the door with careful restraint, though his hands wanted to slam it. The twins remained pressed against him, their small bodies trembling. "Please don't let them take us," May whispered, voice breaking. Lydia's face showed the same fear, though she tried to hide it. "We'll be good, we promise. We can work hard." Ronald's chest ached at their terror. He knelt down, putting himself at their eye level, his rough hands gentle on their shoulders. "Now you listen close," he said softly. "Nobody's taking you anywhere. Not while I draw breath." "But the sheriff said—" Lydia started. "Sheriff ain't always right about what's best." Ronald cut in. "You're safe here, understand? I give you my word." The girls nodded, but their eyes still held shadows of doubt. Ronald sent them to bed soon after, tucking Sarah's shawl around their shoulders as they curled together near the hearth. Once their breathing settled into sleep, Ronald retrieved his axe from the woodshed. The familiar weight settled in his hands as he sat before the fire. Each slow stroke of the whetstone along the blade helped steady his racing thoughts. The sheriff's threats echoed in his mind as he worked. He'd avoided trouble for years, keeping to himself in these mountains. But watching the firelight play across the twins' sleeping faces, he knew that solitude was no longer an option. These children needed protecting, and by God, he aimed to do just that. The axe blade gleamed in the dying firelight as Ronald worked, each careful pass of stone against steel, matching the determination building in his heart. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence while he prepared for the storm to come. Dawn broke crisp and cold over the mountain. Ronald stood in the yard, hitching his old mule bell to a rough-hewn wooden sled while his breath clouded in the frozen air. He'd risen before first light to check the harness straps and pack supplies for the journey into Pine Bluff. "Hold still now," he muttered to Belle, adjusting the leather traces. The mule's ears flicked back at his voice, but she stood patient in the snow. The cabin door creaked open as Lydia and May emerged, wrapped in layers of fur and wool. Ronald had spent the early hours digging through his storage trunk, finding his wife's old winter clothes to keep them warm. The sight of Sarah's red wool scarf around May's thin shoulders made his chest tighten, but he pushed the feeling aside. "Up you go," he said, lifting them onto the sled. He tucked buffalo robes around their legs, making sure no snow could creep in. "It's a fair piece to town, so stay bundled tight." The twins nodded solemnly, huddling together as Ronald took up Belle's lead rope. The sled runners creaked across the snow as they set out, leaving the cabin's warmth behind. Morning sun sparkled across the white-draped forest as they followed the old logging road down the mountain. Belle's hooves crunched steadily through the fresh powder while the twins pointed out rabbit tracks and frost-covered branches. Their quiet wonder at the winter morning helped ease Ronald's growing tension about facing town. After an hour's slow journey, the settlement of Pine Bluff came into view through the trees. False front buildings lined the rutted main street, their wooden facades wearing caps of snow. Smoke rose straight from stone chimneys in the still air. Ronald's jaw tightened as he led Belle past the livery stable, feeling eyes turn their way. "Remember now," he said quietly to the girls. "Stay close by me." The mercantile's bell jangled as they entered. Warmth from the pot-bellied stove hit them in a wave, along with the familiar smell of coffee and leather. Ronald helped the twins brush snow from their clothes while the shopkeeper, old Mr. Howard, watched with narrowed eyes. Whispers followed them down the aisles as Ronald gathered supplies. Flour, sugar, coffee, and dried beans went into his basket. In the clothing section, he found sturdy boots for the girls, holding them up to their feet to check the size. "Them's good winter boots," he explained, helping May try a pair. "Keep your toes warm proper." More townsfolk had filtered in, pretending to shop while stealing glances at the strange trio. Ronald kept his head down, focusing on the tasks at hand. At the counter, Mr. Howard tallied the purchases with elaborate slowness. "Fair bit of supplies," he commented, voice sharp. "Wasting good money on strays seems foolish, even for a mountain man." Ronald's hand stilled on his coin pouch. The twins pressed closer to his legs, feeling the tension. "Reckon my money spent same as any other," Ronald said evenly, counting out the coins. "Ain't asking your opinion on it." Outside, a group of boys loitering by the hitching post started jeering when they emerged. "Hey, look, it's the wild man and his foundlings," one called. Another made whooping sounds, clearly meant to mock the twins' Cherokee heritage. Ronald turned slowly, fixing them with a hard stare that had faced down mountain lions. The boys scattered like quail, their laughter dying in their throats. "Don't pay them no mind," he told the girls softly, but he saw the hurt in their eyes. "Excuse me?" A gentle voice called. Ronald turned to find a young woman approaching, her dark hair neat beneath a wool bonnet. He recognized her as Miss Jensen, the town's SCHOOLMARM. To his surprise, she crouched down to the twins' eye level, her smile warm and genuine. "Hello there. I'm Miss Jensen. I teach at the schoolhouse just down the street." The girls watched her cautiously, but something in her manner drew them out. Lydia spoke first. "I'm Lydia. This is my sister May." "What lovely names," Miss Jensen said. "You know, school starts again after New Year's. I'd be happy to teach you your letters, if you'd like to learn to read." May's eyes widened. "Really? Like in real books?" "Exactly like in real books." Miss Jensen glanced up at Ronald. "All children are welcome in my classroom, Mr. Boone. No exceptions." Ronald shifted uncomfortably, unused to such kindness from townsfolk. "Much obliged, ma'am," he managed. The ride home was filled with excited chatter about learning to read, the unpleasant morning in town forgotten. Ronald listened to their plans and dreams, feeling something stir in his chest he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. A mixture of pride and fear, hope and worry, all tangled together like spring shoots breaking through snow. He glanced back at the twins, their faces bright with joy despite the cold. Maybe, he thought, there was still room in this world for new beginnings. Dark clouds rolled in from the west that evening, bringing bitter winds that rattled the cabin's shutters. Ronald stood at the window, watching the storm gather strength. "Best get some extra wood in before this hits proper," he said, turning to the twins. "Come on, girls. I'll show you how to split kindling." Out in the yard, Ronald demonstrated how to hold the small axe safely. "Like this," he showed them, making controlled strikes to create thin strips of pine for starting fires. Lydia and May watched with rapt attention, their breaths forming little clouds in the cold air. "Can I try?" Lydia asked eagerly. Ronald set up a small log and guided her hands on the handle. "Easy now. Let the weight of the axe do the work." Together they split several pieces while May gathered the kindling into her apron. The first snowflakes began to fall as they finished. "Up on the roof next," Ronald said, grabbing his tools. "That draft needs patching before this storm sets in proper." Inside, the cabin grew warm and snug as evening deepened. Ronald showed Lydia how to stir the venison stew bubbling on the cook stove, though half the carrots ended up scattered across the floor in her enthusiasm. He couldn't help but chuckle as she scrambled to pick them up. "Sorry," she said, face flushed. "Mama never let us help with cooking much. No harm done," Ronald assured her, helping gather the wayward vegetables. "Learning takes practice." May sat by the fire, humming softly to herself. Ronald recognized the tune of Silent Night and felt his throat tighten. Sarah used to sing that very hymn while she worked around the cabin. He hadn't heard Christmas carols within these walls since she passed. A sharp knock at the door startled them all. Ronald opened it to find Chloe Jensen on his porch, her coat and bonnet heavy with snow. "Miss Jensen." The twins called in delight. "I'm sorry to intrude so late," she said, stamping snow from her boots. "But we have an emergency in town. The church stove broke this afternoon. The pipe rusted through completely. With the storm coming, we have nowhere warm enough to hold Christmas service tomorrow." Ronald felt the weight of her unspoken request. His cabin was the largest within walking distance of town. Before he could think better of it, he heard himself say, "Reckon folks could gather here, if they've a mind to. They're here, if they've a mind to." Chloe's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with gratitude. "Are you certain? It would mean quite a crowd." "Ain't much, but it's warm and dry," Ronald said gruffly, trying to ignore how her smile made his pulse quicken. Their eyes met for a long moment before he looked away, his ears burning. "Can we help get ready?" Lydia bounced on her toes while May clapped her hands in excitement. "A real Christmas gathering." "Whoa," Ronald scratched his beard, surveying the cabin. "Place could use a proper cleaning, that's sure." He retrieved the old broom from its corner and began, sweeping with unexpected energy. The twins pitched in eagerly, dusting shelves and straightening bedrolls, while Chloe helped move furniture to create more open space. Ronald found himself watching her as she worked, noting how gracefully she moved, how gently she spoke to the girls. It had been years since a woman's presence had filled these rooms with such warmth. "We could put the nativity scene right here," Chloe suggested, gesturing to the mantel. "And perhaps some pine boughs for decoration?" Ronald nodded, trying to remember where he'd stored Sarah's old Christmas ornaments. The thought of them no longer brought sharp pain, but rather a bittersweet ache mixed with something new. Hope, maybe, or the stirring of joy. "Never thought I'd see this place full of people again," he admitted quietly as they worked. "Reckon those days were behind me." Chloe paused in her cleaning, regarding him thoughtfully. "Sometimes the Lord has other plans for us, Mr. Boone. Sometimes he sends us exactly what we need, even when we think we want to be left alone." Ronald glanced at the twins, now sorting through his collection of tin cups to find enough for everyone. Their presence had already transformed his solitary cabin into something warmer, more alive. And now, preparing to welcome the whole town for Christmas service, it felt right somehow. Sacred, even Dot as though reading his thoughts. Chloe added softly, "After all, the first Christmas was celebrated in a humble shelter too." The evening of December 24th settled over the mountain, draping Ronald's cabin in fresh snow. Inside, lanterns cast a warm glow across rough-hewn walls as neighbors filed through the door, stamping boots and shaking off winter's chill. Ranch families arrived in groups, their children wide-eyed at the transformed space. Pine boughs decorated the mantel, their fresh scent mingling with wood smoke and coffee brewing on the cook stove. Ronald stood awkwardly near the door, nodding to each arrival. His hands felt strange without his usual task to occupy them. Lydia and May flitted about like excited sparrows, showing younger children where to sit on blankets spread across the plank floor. A hush fell over the gathering as Tall Bear entered, his dignified presence commanding respect. The Cherokee elder's dark eyes took in the scene, and a slight smile touched his weathered face. Several townsfolk who usually avoided him now made room respectfully, perhaps reminded by the season that prejudice had no place in a house of worship. "Welcome, grandfather," Lydia said shyly, using the Cherokee term of respect Tall Bear had taught her. He placed a gentle hand on her head in blessing. Chloe Yensen stood near the fireplace, her face glowing in the lamplight as she organized the children for carols. She wore her best dress, Ronald noticed, though he quickly looked away when she caught his eye. The twins had helped her arrange hymn books and set out candles in tin holders along the walls. "Shall we begin?" Chloe asked, her clear voice carrying through the crowded cabin. She struck a note on her small pitch pipe, and young voices joined with old in, "O come, all ye faithful." The sound filled every corner of the cabin, making the log walls seem to vibrate with joy. Ronald remained silent at first, letting the familiar words wash over him. He hadn't sung since Sarah's passing, hadn't wanted to. But then he felt small hands tugging at his sleeves. Looking down, he found the twins gazing up at him expectantly. "Please sing with us," May whispered, pressing a hymn book into his calloused hands. "It's Christmas Eve." Something in her earnest face broke through his reserve. When Chloe started Silent Night, Ronald's deep voice joined the others, rough at first, then growing stronger. The twins beamed up at him, their faces bright with pride. "Still not, Heilig not." The words carried him back to evenings with Sarah, but the memory brought comfort now instead of pain. He felt Chloe's approving glance and managed a small smile in return. As the last notes faded, Tall Bear rose slowly to his feet. The cabin grew quiet as he raised his hands and began to pray in Cherokee, the ancient words flowing like water over stones. Though few understood the language, every head bowed in respect. He concluded in English, "Great Spirit, bless this gathering of your children. Let the peace of this night heal old wounds and open closed hearts." Ronald looked around his cabin, seeing it through new eyes. Here sat ranch hands beside shopkeepers, Cherokee elder beside settler children, all united in the simple joy of Christmas. The divisions that usually separated them seemed to melt away like frost in morning sun. These walls that had witnessed so many lonely nights now sheltered a moment of true communion. The service continued with scripture readings and more carols. The twins sat close to Ronald, their small bodies warm against his sides as they sang with clear, sweet voices. He marveled at how naturally they had brought light back into his dark world. During What Child Is This? Chloe moved closer to lead the children's parts. Her hand brushed Ronald's arm as she leaned in to help May find the right page. The brief touch sent warmth spreading through his chest, awakening feelings he had thought long buried. Their eyes met over the hymnal, and something passed between them, understanding, perhaps, or possibility. As the final prayer ended and people began gathering their things, Ronald stood rooted in place, overwhelmed by the evening's grace. These girls who had appeared at his door exactly 1 year ago, could their arrival have been mere chance? Or had some higher purpose guided their desperate steps to his cabin that bitter night? Watching them help Chloe collect hymn books, their faces glowing with happiness, Ronald felt certainty settle in his heart. Providence, not accident, had sent these children to him. They had led him back to life, back to community, back to hope. His cabin had become more than shelter. It was now a sanctuary where healing could begin. The peaceful glow of Christmas. Eve shattered as the cabin door burst open, letting in a blast of frigid air. Sheriff Rudd stomped inside, snow falling from his broad shoulders. 2 deputies flanked him, their hands resting on their gun belts. The singing died away as worried murmurs rippled through the gathered families. "Evening, folks," Rudd announced, his voice cutting through the silence. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it high. Got here a legal writ from Judge Halbrook himself. Those 2 girls are to be removed to the county orphanage. Right now, Lydia and May pressed against Ronald's legs, their small fingers digging into his trousers. "No, please," Lydia whimpered, while May began to sob quietly. The deputies moved forward, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Ronald's body tensed as he stepped in front of the girls, spreading his arms to block their path. His eyes blazed with a fury that made the nearest deputy pause. "It's Christmas Eve, Sheriff," Ronald growled, his voice low and dangerous. "These children ain't done nothing wrong." Rudd's face hardened. "The law don't take holidays, Boone. You've got no legal right to keep these girls. Step aside or I'll have you arrested for obstruction." "How'll that help them, you sitting in a jail cell while they end up at the orphanage anyway?" Chloe Jensen moved to stand beside Ronald, her face flushed with emotion. "Sheriff Rudd, surely you can wait until after Christmas? Show some Christian charity on this holy night." "Miss Jensen, this ain't your concern," Rudd snapped, barely glancing at her. "The law's the law. Those girls need proper care, not some mountain hermit playing parent." Ronald's hands clenched into fists. The muscles in his jaw worked as he stared down the lawman. For a moment, the cabin crackled with tension. Several townspeople edged toward the door, not wanting to witness what might come next. "Mr. Boone?" Chloe whispered, touching his arm gently. "Don't make it worse." "Not tonight." The twins hugged his legs tighter, their tears soaking into his pants. Ronald looked down at their frightened faces, then at the armed deputies. His shoulders sagged as the fight drained from him. He couldn't risk violence, not with children present, not on Christmas Eve. "Service is over," he announced roughly. "Everyone go home." The gathered families filed out in uncomfortable silence, avoiding eye contact. A few cast sympathetic glances at the twins, but none dared oppose the sheriff. Tall Bear paused in the doorway, meeting Ronald's eyes with a look of understanding before disappearing into the snowy night. "I'll be back tomorrow," Rudd declared, pinning the writ to Ronald's wall with cruel precision. "Have them ready to travel." He turned on his heel and stalked out. His deputies following Chloe lingered, helping the girls prepare for bed. She tucked them in near the fireplace, where they curled together like frightened rabbits. "I'll speak to Judge Halbrook first thing after Christmas," she promised Ronald in a low voice. "There must be something we can do." After she left, Ronald sat in his chair, staring at the damning paper on his wall. The firelight made the official seal gleam mockingly. The twins had finally drifted into uneasy sleep, still holding each other tight, their faces streaked with dried tears. He'd promised to protect them, sworn they'd never be harmed. Now the law itself threatened to tear them away. And for the first time since finding them in his trash barrel, Ronald felt utterly helpless. His rifle hung on the wall, useless against this threat. His strength, his determination, his growing love for these girls, none of it could stand against the black ink on that paper. The fire burned low as midnight approached. Ronald remained awake, turning possibilities over in his mind, each one darker than the last. The twins stirred in their sleep, whimpering at bad dreams. He watched them, his heart heavy with dread, knowing that tomorrow might be the last time he saw their faces. The writ seemed to mock him from the wall, a reminder that all his efforts to build a family could be destroyed by a single piece of paper. Ronald had faced bears, blizzards, and bandits in his time, but never had he felt so powerless as he did now, watching over two sleeping children he might not be able to save. The winter sun cast long shadows across the frozen creek as Ronald led the twins down the snowy path. His leather boots crunched through the crusty surface, while smaller footprints followed behind. He carried an old saw and some burlap sacks, determined to teach the girls a useful skill during what might be their last day together. "See here," Ronald demonstrated, kneeling at the creek's edge. "Ice keeps food fresh come summer. He scored a line in the thick surface, showing them how to measure the proper size for storage blocks. Lydia bounced on her toes, eager to help. "Can I try, Mr. Boone?" She reached for the saw, her small hands red from the cold despite the wool mittens Chloe had brought them. "Careful now," Ronald cautioned, guiding her hands. Steady strokes, just like with firewood. May watched from a few steps back, hugging herself against the chill. "Miss Jensen said when school starts, we'll learn our letters first," she said softly. "She promised to teach us to write our names." Ronald's hand faltered on the saw. The mention of future lessons stabbed at his heart, knowing the sheriff would arrive soon to take them away. He forced himself to keep working, not wanting the girls to see his pain. "That's fine learning," he managed to say. "Miss Jensen's a good teacher." The girls chattered about the Christmas service as they worked, remembering the hymns and how everyone had squeezed into the cabin. Their voices filled the winter air with innocent joy, making the task both sweeter and more difficult for Ronald. "Did you see how many people came?" Lydia asked, helping to wrap a cut block in burlap. "Even that nice Indian man who said prayers in his special words." "Tall Bear," Ronald corrected gently. "He's a respected elder." "I liked his prayer," May said. "Even though I didn't understand it, it felt warm somehow." Ronald nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. These simple moments, teaching, talking, sharing work, had become precious beyond measure. The thought of his cabin returning to silence felt unbearable. As dusk approached, they hauled the ice blocks back home. Smoke curled from the chimney, and through the window, Ronald spotted Chloe Jensen waiting inside. She must have let herself in with the spare key he'd given her for emergencies. The twins rushed to greet her, leaving snowy boots by the door. The cabin filled with the smell of fresh bread as Chloe unwrapped a warm loaf from her shawl. "I thought you might need something hearty," she said, meeting Ronald's eyes with understanding. "And I wanted to talk about tomorrow." Ronald busied himself stoking the fire, while the girls devoured thick slices of bread, slathered with butter. Chloe waited until they were occupied before speaking low. "You need to petition Judge Halbrook directly," she insisted. "You have a good case, Ronald. You own this land free and clear, earn honest income from your lumber and furs, and these past weeks have proved your character." Ronald shook his head, shame coloring his voice. "I'm no fit guardian, just a broken man who ran from grief instead of facing it proper." He gestured at the sparse cabin. "This ain't no place for raising children." Chloe's eyes flashed with conviction. "God often calls the least likely to protect the most vulnerable. Look at Moses, a murderer who fled to the wilderness. Yet God chose him to save children from harm." She touched his arm gently. "These girls need you, Ronald. And perhaps you need them just as much." The twins had grown sleepy, curling up in Chloe's lap as she sat in the rocking chair. May's thumb had crept toward her mouth, a habit showing when she felt secure. Lydia's eyes were already closed, her small hand clutching Chloe's skirt. Ronald watched them, his heart catching at the sight. Chloe's gentle hand smoothed their hair, her face soft in the firelight as she hummed a lullaby. It was a picture of everything he'd thought forever lost: home, family, peace. The kind of scene that used to haunt his dreams after Sarah died, but now felt within reach. Yet the sheriff's deadline loomed over them like storm clouds. Tomorrow would bring Rudd with his deputies and his writ, ready to tear this fragile family apart. Ronald's hands clenched as he remembered the cold look in the lawman's eyes, the cruel satisfaction in his voice. "I ain't educated," Ronald said quietly. "Don't know fancy words or legal ways. But you know what's right," Chloe answered. "Sometimes that's all the wisdom needed." She looked down at the sleeping girls. "They trust you to protect them. Will you?" The question hung in the violet air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Ronald stared at the peaceful faces of the twins, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a sacred duty, he could no longer deny. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows as Ronald sat at his rough-hewn table, gripping a pencil stub. Paper lay before him, marred by crossed-out words and ink blots. His large hands, more familiar with axe handles than writing tools, trembled slightly as he tried to form neat letters. "Just speak from your heart," Chloe encouraged, standing nearby. "Tell Judge Halbrook what these girls mean to you." Ronald nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the winter chill. "Dear Judge," he wrote slowly, "I ain't much for fancy words, but I'm writing about them twin girls in my care." Chloe leaned closer, reading over his shoulder. The twins played quietly in the corner with cornhusk dolls they'd made, sneaking glances at the adults. "Tell 'em about your land," she suggested. "And your work." Ronald's pencil scratched across the paper. "I own 40 acres free and clear, been working it 15 years. Got steady income from lumber and furs, enough to keep food on the table and coal in the stove." He paused, knuckles white around the pencil. "These girls need more than just feeding, though. They need love and teaching. Reckon I can give the first, and Miss Jensen here has promised to school them proper." Chloe touched his shoulder gently, encouraging him to continue. Outside, boots crunched in the snow, and Tall Bear appeared in the doorway. The Cherokee elder's presence filled the small cabin with quiet dignity. "I bring words about the children's father," Tall Bear announced, removing his hat. He was James Whitefeather, scout for the Union Army, saved 30 men from ambush near Fort Gibson, died honorably serving the peace. Ronald set down his pencil, rising to offer Tall Bear a chair. "Much obliged for coming. Your words carry weight with town folk. Truth carries its own weight," Tall Bear replied, sitting straight back near the fire. "These little ones carry good blood. Their father understood bridges between peoples. The court should know this." Ronald nodded gravely, returning to his letter. He added Tall Bear's testimony, his handwriting growing more confident. Chloe helped him smooth the rougher phrases, but kept his honest voice intact. The winter afternoon deepened into evening. Tall Bear departed with a ceremonial gesture of blessing toward the twins. Ronald folded the finished letter carefully, sealing it in an envelope Chloe provided. "Time for prayers," Lydia announced as the lamp was lit. She and May knelt by their bedrolls, hands clasped as they'd done with their mother. Ronald cleared his throat awkwardly. "Reckon I should join you," he said, lowering himself to his knees beside them. His prayer came out rough but sincere. "Lord, help me do right by these little ones. Give me strength to face what's coming. And bless Miss Jensen," May added softly, "for teaching us our letters soon. For teaching us our letters soon. And please let us stay with Mr. Boone," Lydia whispered. "We want him for our pa." Ronald's breath caught in his throat. The simple request pierced straight through his weather-hardened heart. He reached out, drawing them close. "I promise you, girls," he said hoarsely, "I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. Whatever comes tomorrow, remember that." After tucking them in, Ronald retrieved his best coat from the trunk, the one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. Moths had left their marks, but it was still dignified. He brushed it carefully, then took out his tools. The familiar rhythm of stone against steel filled the cabin as he sharpened his axe and hunting knife. Not for fighting. He was done with that life, but because facing the law meant showing he could provide. A man's tools spoke of his character. The twins' soft breathing soon joined the whisper of the fire, but sleep eluded Ronald. He sat in his chair, staring at the rough-beamed ceiling. Fear gnawed at his gut. Fear of failing these innocent souls who trusted him. Fear of losing this unexpected family just as he'd found it. Yet beneath the fear lay something stronger. The same courage that had helped him survive alone in these mountains now called him to stand and fight. Not with fists or firearms, but with the simple truth of love and duty. He watched the girls sleep, their small faces peaceful in the dying firelight. May's hand reached across to clutch her sister's, even in dreams. Such trust demanded protection. Such innocence deserved a home. Ronald touched the letter in his pocket, feeling the weight of his clumsy words. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But tonight, in this quiet cabin, he had chosen his path. Whatever the cost, he would fight for these children. Not just as their guardian, but as the father they wanted him to be. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as Ronald hitched his mule to the wooden sled. His breath clouded in the frigid air while he checked the harness twice, making sure every buckle was secure. The morning held that special stillness that comes only after fresh snow, broken only by the mule's soft nickering and the crunch of boots on frost. Inside the cabin, Chloe helped the twins into their warmest clothes. She wrapped them in thick furs Ronald had traded for last summer, turning what had once been mere pelts into shields against the biting January wind. Lydia and May looked like little bears, only their bright eyes visible above the fur collars. "You look mighty fine," Ronald said gruffly, his voice betraying more emotion than he intended. He lifted them onto the sled, tucking wool blankets around their legs. Chloe climbed up beside them, her blue wool dress a splash of color against the white landscape. The mule plodded forward, pulling them down the winding trail toward Pine Bluff. Snowflakes stung their cheeks, and Ronald walked alongside, one hand on the sled's rail. The twins huddled close to Chloe, watching their breath turn to frost in the morning air dot as they approached town. Ronald's stomach tightened. People lined the street leading to the courthouse, bundled in coats and shawls. Some nodded respectfully, while others turned away. Mothers pulled their children closer, as the wildness might be catching. The sled's runners squeaked against packed snow as they passed the general store, the smithy, the telegraph office. The courthouse stood ahead, its wooden steps swept clean of snow. Ronald helped Chloe and the girls down from the sled, conscious of every eye upon them. The twins gripped his hands tightly, one on each side, as they climbed the steps. Inside, the courtroom air hung heavy with wood smoke from the pot-bellied stove. Judge Halbrook sat behind his raised desk, gray hair neatly combed, watching through wire-rimmed spectacles as people filed in. His face gave nothing away, though his eyes lingered on the twins for a moment. Sheriff Rudd occupied a chair near the front, his badge gleaming. A satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth as he observed Ronald's entrance. The mountain man felt every patch and wear in his best coat, every scuff on his polished boots. But when May squeezed his right hand and Lydia his left, Ronald drew himself up straighter. He might not match the sheriff's polished appearance, but he knew what mattered more than fancy clothes or shiny badges. "Court is now in session," Judge Halbrook announced, his voice filling the cold room. "We're here to determine the custody of Lydia and May Whitefeather, currently in the temporary care of Ronald Boone." Sheriff Rudd rose smoothly, adjusting his gun belt. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. Mr. Boone is a known recluse, living alone in the hills. No experience with children, no connection to proper society. These girls need structure, education, proper Christian guidance." "If I may, Your Honor," Chloe interrupted, standing from her seat behind Ronald. "I can speak to the matter of education." The judge nodded, and Rudd's smile faltered slightly. As the town schoolteacher, Chloe continued, "I've already arranged for the girls to join my class. Mr. Boone brought them to me himself, seeking proper schooling. They're bright children, eager to learn." The sheriff's jaw tightened. One schoolmom's charity doesn't make a home. Boone lives like a wild man up there. Hunting, trapping, is that any life for young girls? The county orphanage can provide proper Christian guidance? Ronald's voice rumbled through the room, surprising even himself with its steadiness. Like teaching them to fear their own Cherokee blood? To forget their father was a hero? The room fell silent. Judge Halbrook leaned forward slightly. You have something to add about their father, Mr. Boone? Ronald reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing the letter containing Tallbear's testimony. Yes, sir, I do. And I aim to tell you why these girls belong in my home, if you'll hear me out. The judge gestured for him to continue. The twins pressed closer to Ronald's sides, their small faces turned up toward him with complete trust. Looking down at them, then back at the judge, Ronald felt the last of his nervousness fade away. He might be rough-spoken and weather-worn, but he knew what these children needed. More importantly, he knew what he could give them, not just shelter and food, but the love and protection they deserved. The whole room seemed to hold its breath as Ronald prepared to speak his piece. Sheriff Rudd's smug expression had given way to something harder, more calculating. But Ronald kept his eyes on Judge Halbrook, drawing strength from the quiet dignity of the law that stood above any one man's prejudice. Sheriff Rudd stood at his full height, adjusting his vest with practiced confidence. Your Honor, the facts are simple. Ronald Boone has lived like a hermit these past 5 years. No family, no church attendance, no participation in town affairs. The man barely speaks 2 words at market. He gestured dismissively toward Ronald. Now he wants to raise 2 young girls? The county orphanage has trained staff, proper beds, daily lessons. Murmurs rippled through the packed courtroom. Ronald's weathered hands gripped the wooden rail before him, but he held his tongue, remembering Chloe's advice to let the proceedings unfold properly. The orphanage, Rudd continued, can ensure these children are raised properly, away from, he paused meaningfully, unfortunate influences. Before the sheriff could continue, Chloe Jensen rose from her seat, her blue dress rustling in the hushed room. Your Honor, if I may speak? Judge Halbrook nodded, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the winter light from the tall windows. I am the schoolteacher here in Pine Bluff. Chloe began, her voice clear and steady. I have witnessed firsthand how Mr. Boone cares for these children. When they first came to him, they were half-starved and freezing. He gave them food, shelter, and most importantly, love. She squared her shoulders. He brought them to me himself, asking about schooling. He purchased books, slates, and warm clothes for their education. Rudd shifted impatiently, but Chloe pressed on. Just this Christmas, Mr. Boone opened his home to the entire community when our church stove failed. Cherokee and settler alike gathered under his roof in Christian fellowship. These are not the actions of an unfit guardian, but of a man embracing both family and community. Tallbear rose next, his dignified presence commanding attention. He walked to the front, moccasins silent on the wooden floor. I knew Thomas Whitefeather, these children's father, he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner. He was a scout for the United States Army. He saved many soldiers' lives during the war, including men from this very town. He looked directly at Sheriff Rudd. To deny these children a home because of their Cherokee blood would dishonor their father's sacrifice. It would break faith with all who believe in justice. The twins, who had been sitting quietly beside Ronald, suddenly spoke up. Please, Lydia called out, her small voice trembling. We want to stay with Pa Ronald. He teaches us about the forest, May added, and reads to us every night. Judge Halbrook raised his hand gently. Children, while I appreciate your words, the court must hear from Mr. Boone himself. He turned his steady gaze to Ronald. Sir, why should this court grant you custody? Ronald stood slowly, his rough hand steady on the rail. The room fell completely silent. Your Honor, he began, his voice rough but clear. 5 years ago, I lost my wife Sarah and our unborn child to fever. I couldn't bear to be around folks after that. Retreated to my cabin, lived off the land. Reckoned I'd die alone up there. He paused, swallowing hard. Then these girls showed up on Christmas Eve, digging through my trash for food. Something broke open in me that night. He glanced down at the twins, who pressed closer to his legs. I know I ain't perfect, No, I've lived wild these years. But these children, they need more than just proper beds and daily lessons. They need someone who'll love them fierce and true, who'll protect their heritage and their hearts both. His voice grew stronger. I've got 300 acres of good land, strong hands for work, and a heart that's learning to love again. I'm asking this court to let me be their father, to give them the home they deserve. The silence that followed felt heavy with meaning. Judge Halbrook studied Ronald intently, his lined face thoughtful. Chloe reached forward and squeezed Ronald's shoulder in support, while Tallbear nodded slowly in approval. Even some of the townspeople, who had looked skeptical earlier, seemed moved by Ronald's words. Sheriff, Rudd started to rise again, but Judge Halbrook held up his hand. I believe I have heard sufficient testimony, he said, his voice grave in the hushed courtroom. The twins huddled closer to Ronald, their small hands clutching his coat. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the judge's decision. Judge Halbrook removed his spectacles, polishing them slowly with a white handkerchief. The packed courtroom remained still as stone, every eye fixed upon his weathered face. Even the winter wind seemed to hold its breath outside the frost-rimmed windows dotted last. The judge replaced his spectacles and cleared his throat. Having heard all testimony and considered the evidence before this court, I find Mr. Ronald Boone's petition for guardianship to be valid and just. His gavel struck the wooden block with authority. The children, Lydia and May Whitefeather, shall remain under his care and protection. Sheriff Rudd's face darkened like a thundercloud. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. Your Honor, I must object. This sets a dangerous precedent. The gavel cracked again, harder this time. My ruling stands, Sheriff. This court is adjourned. Lydia and May didn't wait another moment. They burst from their seats with twin squeals of joy, launching themselves into Ronald's arms. He caught them both, his own eyes glistening as they buried their faces in his coat. Pa Ronald! Pa Ronald! They cried, their voices muffled against his chest. Chloe Jensen stood nearby, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, her smile bright as sunshine after rain. Several townsfolk in the gallery wiped away tears of their own, moved by the sight of the gruff mountain man holding his daughters close. The courthouse. Doors swung wide as people filed out into the snowy afternoon. A crowd had gathered on the steps, waiting to hear the verdict. Ronald emerged with a twin, holding each hand, their faces glowing with happiness. Some townspeople nodded respectfully as he passed, while others whispered behind raised hands. Yet Ronald walked tall, his head high, paying no mind to the mutters. Chloe fell into step beside them, her blue dress bright against the white landscape. I knew the judge would see the truth, she said softly, her hand brushing Ronald's arm. Tallbear made his way through the crowd to clasp Ronald's hand. No words were needed. The firm grip and steady gaze spoke of brotherhood and respect earned. Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, dusting their shoulders and catching in the twins' dark hair. Pine Bluff lay hushed under its white blanket, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the main street. Ronald gazed at the town with new eyes. These buildings, these people, they were no longer just a place to trade furs and buy supplies. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt the stirring of belonging. Not just to the wild places and the quiet forests, but to a community once more. The twins skipped beside him, their boots leaving small prints in the fresh snow, while Chloe's presence warmed his right side and Tallbear's solidarity steadied his left. Together, they made their way through the softly falling snow, heading home. The cabin glowed like a warm ember in the deepening twilight. Inside, the aroma of fresh-baked bread mingled with pine smoke from the hearth. Lydia and May scampered about, setting tin plates and cups on the rough-hewn table while Chloe tended to the loaf browning in the Dutch oven. Ronald sat in his chair, watching in quiet wonder. Just weeks ago, this same room had echoed with nothing but his own footsteps. Now it brimmed with life and purpose. The twins' laughter sparkled like bells as they arranged everything just so, proud of their helping. After they finished the hearty supper, May tugged at Chloe's sleeve. "Please, Miss Jensen, can we sing? The Christmas song about joy?" Chloe smiled and straightened her skirts. "Joy to the world?" "Of course, dear ones." Her clear voice lifted in the first notes, and the twins joined in with eager enthusiasm. Ronald hesitated, then added his own deep bass, rough but true. The harmony filled every corner of the cabin, chasing away old shadows. When the girls finally dozed by the fire, Ronald turned to Chloe. "Much obliged, ma'am, for standing with us today. Meant everything." "I see what you truly are, Ronald Boone," Chloe said softly. "A man with the strength to be a father. And perhaps," she paused, color rising in her cheeks, "perhaps something more." Ronald's heart thundered against his ribs as he reached for her hand. Her fingers were warm and sure in his callous grip. Outside, snow drifted silently across the sleeping valley. But within the cabin's walls, warmth and hope bloomed like spring flowers. Later, kneeling beside his bed, Ronald whispered his first real prayer in years. Simple words of thanks for this precious gift of family, faith and love reborn. "Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.